Selfish. That's what you are, Alexis. Always making everything about yourself. That's what my mother said when she called to cancel my 28th birthday dinner. The reservation I'd made 3 months in advance. The same restaurant where we'd celebrated every milestone for the past decade. She said it again when I asked why they couldn't do both events. And again when I suggested we could celebrate Natalie's promotion the next weekend instead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But there I was, 6 months later, sitting in the executive boardroom of Meridian Technologies, watching my sister present her quarterly results to a room full of people who had no idea they were about to meet their new CEO. My name is Alexis Hartwell, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever been so thoroughly dismissed by your own family that when you finally held their entire world in your hands, they couldn't even process what they were seeing? The birthday that never happened was supposed to be special, not because of the date, but because it was the first time in years I'd asked my family for anything. I'd been working 100-hour weeks at a startup in Portland, living off instant noodles and determination, building something I believed in. I just wanted one evening, one dinner, one moment where my parents, my sister Natalie, and my brother Trevor could sit around a table and maybe, just maybe, ask me how I was doing. Instead, I got a phone call at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Alexis, honey, we need to talk." Mom's voice had that tone. The one she used when she was about to deliver news that wasn't really news but a decision that had already been made without me. Natalie just got promoted to Senior Vice President at Meridian Technologies. "It's huge, sweetheart. Huge. The celebration dinner is this Saturday." "But Mom," I said, staring at the birthday reservation confirmation email on my laptop screen, "Saturday is my birthday dinner. We planned this months ago." Silence. Then that laugh, that dismissive little laugh that I'd heard my entire life whenever I reminded them of something they'd committed to for me. "Oh, Alexis, this is different. This is Natalie's career. This is her future. Your birthday happens every year, but promotions like this, they're once in a lifetime." I sat there in my cramped studio apartment, surrounded by empty energy drink cans and printed business proposals, feeling something crack inside my chest. Not break. Crack. Like ice before it shatters completely. "We can do your birthday next weekend," Mom continued, as if she was doing me a favor, "or maybe the weekend after. You understand, don't you? Family comes first. And right now, family means supporting Natalie. Family comes first. Unless you're me. Unless you're the daughter who chose a different path. Unless you're the one who didn't take the safe job, didn't marry the approved boyfriend, didn't stay in Millbrook Heights where everyone could keep an eye on you and make sure you weren't getting too big for your britches." I understood something that day, but it wasn't what Mom thought I was understanding. The worst part wasn't the cancellation. It was the group text that came after I hung up. The family chat where Trevor immediately chimed in with, "So excited for Nat's celebration," and Dad added, "Our VP daughter. Can't wait to toast to her success." Not one mention of the birthday they'd just canceled. Not one acknowledgement that they'd chosen one daughter's achievement over the other daughter's existence. It was like I'd never been born in the first place. I stared at that group chat for 20 minutes, watching them plan the perfect celebration for Natalie, the restaurant choice, the guest list, the speeches they'd give, the photos they'd post. All the energy and excitement and family pride that I'd begged for scraps of my entire life, pouring out like water for my sister who already had everything. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I turned off my phone and sat in complete silence in my apartment. No TV, no music, no distractions. Just me and the decision that was crystallizing in my mind like frost on a window. I wasn't going to beg anymore. I wasn't going to ask for their attention, their approval, their love. I wasn't going to compete with Natalie for space in their hearts. I was going to build something so undeniable that one day, the choice wouldn't be between supporting her or acknowledging me. The choice would be between recognizing what I'd become or losing their precious golden child's career entirely. I had no idea how prophetic that thought would turn out to be. 3 days later, while my family toasted Natalie's promotion at Giovanni's, the same restaurant where my birthday dinner should have been, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Portland, signing papers that would change everything. Papers that would turn my little startup idea into something much bigger. Papers that connected me with investors who saw what my family couldn't. Papers that would eventually put me in a position to hold Natalie's entire professional world in my hands. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the real story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when the daughter they forgot to love becomes the woman they can't afford to ignore. It's about the moment when family first suddenly means something very different when you're the one writing the checks. It's about the day my sister looked across a boardroom table and realized that the birthday girl they'd dismissed was now the person who could end her career with a single signature. And it starts with a celebration that never happened and ends with a recognition that couldn't be avoided. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The birthday cancellation wasn't the first time. It was just the moment I finally started counting. When I graduated summa cum laude from Riverside University with a double major in computer science and business administration, my family's response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, honey," Mom said over the phone, distracted by something in the background. "Natalie just got accepted to the management training program at Meridian Technologies. Isn't that exciting? She'll be working directly under the VP of Operations." My graduation party? A quick dinner at Applebee's with my parents checking their phones every 5 minutes to see if Natalie had texted updates from her new job orientation. When I landed my first software engineering position at Quantum Dynamics in downtown Portland, a competitive role that hundreds of people had applied for, the family group chat response was a single thumbs-up emoji from Dad. But when Natalie got promoted from coordinator to assistant manager 6 months later, suddenly there were photos, celebration posts, and a family dinner that mysteriously happened without consulting my schedule. "We didn't want to bother you," Trevor explained when I asked why no one had invited me. "You're always so busy with your computer stuff." My computer stuff. That's what they called the work I was passionate about. The late nights I spent coding solutions that could revolutionize how small businesses manage their operations. The weekends I sacrificed learning new programming languages and studying market trends. The dreams I shared about creating technology that could level the playing field for entrepreneurs who couldn't afford expensive enterprise software. Computer stuff. But when Natalie complained about her workload or needed advice about office politics, suddenly my phone would ring. "Alexis, you're good with problem solving," Mom would say. "Can you help your sister figure out this work situation?" Never mind that I was dealing with my own career challenges, my own workplace dynamics, my own professional growth. I was useful when they needed my brain, invisible when they were handing out recognition. The pattern was so consistent I could predict it. Family gatherings were scheduled around Natalie's availability. Holiday plans revolved around her boyfriend's family's traditions. Even casual conversations somehow always circled back to her achievements, her challenges, her future. During Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I sat at the dinner table listening to a 40-minute discussion about Natalie's latest performance review and her manager's feedback. When I tried to share news about the innovative inventory management system I designed that was saving my company thousands of dollars monthly, Dad literally interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Natalie about her Christmas bonus. "That's great, Alexis, really," he said, not even looking at me. "Nat, tell us more about the leadership conference they're sending you to." Christmas morning was the same story. Natalie's gifts were thoughtful, personal, expensive. A designer watch for her new professional wardrobe. A leather portfolio with her initials embossed in gold. A weekend spa getaway to help her relax from all the workplace stress. My gift? A generic electronics store gift card with a note that said, "For your computer hobby." Hobby. 3 years of building my expertise, establishing my reputation, contributing to successful product launches. And they still saw what I did as a hobby. Something cute that kept me busy until I found a real career path like Natalie's. The worst part wasn't even the dismissal. It was the way they'd weaponize my success when it served them. When Uncle Richard needed help with his small business website, suddenly I was brilliant with technology, and they'd volunteer my services without asking. When Cousin Emma needed her laptop fixed, I became the computer expert of the family, who obviously had nothing better to do on a Saturday. But when it came time to celebrate achievements or acknowledge expertise, I was back to being the daughter with the computer hobby, who probably wouldn't understand the complexities of real business like what Natalie did at Meridian Technologies. I started keeping a mental tally after the birthday incident, how many times they forgot to ask about my work versus how many times they brought up Natalie's career. How many family photos I was cropped out of because I looked tired versus how many featured Natalie prominently. How many times my accomplishments were diminished with words like nice or interesting versus the elaborate celebrations they threw for her smallest milestones. The score wasn't even close. By the time I made my decision to leave quantum dynamics and start my own company, I'd stopped expecting different results. I announced it during a family dinner at their house in Millbrook Heights, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd be impressed by my entrepreneurial courage. "Oh, Alexis," Mom sighed, the same tone she used when I was 7 and announced I wanted to be an astronaut. "Startups are so risky. Wouldn't it be better to find a stable job like Natalie's? Meridian Technologies is always hiring. I could ask her to put in a good word for you." A good word. For me. From my younger sister. About a job at the company where she was thriving while I was... what? Failing to thrive anywhere else? That night, lying in my childhood bedroom that had been converted into Mom's craft room the moment I left for college, I finally understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. They weren't going to change. The pattern wasn't a phase or a misunderstanding or a temporary imbalance that would correct itself once I proved my worth. This was their family structure. Natalie was the star, and I was the supporting character whose job was to applaud from the sidelines and provide technical support when needed. But patterns can be broken, especially when the person everyone underestimated is about to become the person everyone needs. I just had to be patient enough to let them build their entire world around the assumption that I'd always be invisible. Because the higher Natalie climbed at Meridian Technologies, the more spectacular the view would be when I finally stepped out of the shadows. I stopped going home for holidays after that. Not dramatically. Not with a big announcement or ultimatum, I just quietly started saying no. "Alexis, Easter brunch is at 11 a.m., Mom texted in March. Can you bring that spinach salad you made last year?" "Can't make it this time," I replied, working on a project deadline. "Thanksgiving at our house, usual time," came the November text. "I'll be traveling for work." Christmas Eve dinner, and we're doing gifts Christmas morning. Dad got Natalie the most beautiful jewelry set. "Have a wonderful time. Give everyone my love." Each declined invitation was met with mild disappointment, the kind you'd feel if your favorite coffee shop was closed unexpectedly. Inconvenient, but not catastrophic. No one called to ask why I was suddenly unavailable. No one questioned whether I was okay or if something was wrong. They just redistributed the spinach salad duty and moved on. The space I left behind closed so seamlessly it was like I'd never been there at all. While they were taking family photos without the missing sister, I was building something they couldn't see. Something they wouldn't have understood even if I'd tried to explain it. Next-Gen Solutions started in my studio apartment with 3 other developers I'd met at a startup networking event in Portland. Kai Nakamura, brilliant with user interface design. Devin Rodriguez, a database architect who could make information systems sing. And Riley Chen, whose marketing instincts were so sharp they could smell a successful product launch from 3 states away. We weren't trying to change the world. At least not initially. We were just 4 people who believed that small and medium-sized businesses deserved enterprise-level software without enterprise-level price tags. We saw companies struggling with outdated systems, losing productivity and revenue because they couldn't afford the tools that big corporations took for granted. Our first product was inventory management software that learned from usage patterns and predicted ordering needs. Not revolutionary, but elegantly simple and priced for businesses with 20 employees instead of 20,000. While my family celebrated Natalie's promotion to regional sales manager, I was pulling 18-hour days debugging code and refining algorithms. While they posted photos from her company retreat in Aspen, I was pitching to venture capitalists in coffee shops and borrowed conference rooms. The first 6 months were brutal. We lived on ramen noodles and optimism, splitting the cost of a single shared office space in an industrial building that smelled like sawdust and broken dreams. My parents had no idea I was sleeping on an air mattress and showering at the gym because every penny I had was invested in the company. "How's the computer consulting going?" Dad asked during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. Computer consulting, that's what they decided my startup was. Consulting. Like I was helping people install printers instead of building enterprise software from the ground up. "It's going well," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate to describe the complexity of what we were actually doing. "That's nice, honey. Your sister just closed the biggest deal in her division's history. Meridian Technologies might promote her to director level by the end of the year." While Natalie was closing deals, I was learning things they don't teach you in business school. How to negotiate with suppliers when you have more vision than capital. How to motivate a team when you can only pay them in equity and pizza. How to present to investors who could change your life with a single decision. The breakthrough came 8 months after I stopped going to family dinners. A mid-sized manufacturing company in Seattle had been struggling with inventory inefficiencies that were costing them hundreds of thousands annually. Their existing software was a patchwork of systems that couldn't communicate with each other. They needed something custom but affordable, powerful but intuitive. We spent 3 weeks practically living at their facility, understanding their workflows, their pain points, their goals. When we delivered the solution, it didn't just solve their inventory problems, it revolutionized their entire operations management approach. Word spread the way it does in business circles when something actually works. 1 satisfied client led to 3 inquiries. 3 successful implementations led to 10 more requests. Within 6 months, we had more business than our 4-person team could handle. That's when the investors started calling us instead of the other way around. Vulcan Capital Partners reached out first, then Redwood Ventures. By the time Sterling Investment Group scheduled a meeting, we weren't desperate 20-somethings begging for funding anymore. We were a proven company with a waiting list of clients and a track record of delivering results. The Sterling meeting changed everything, not just because they offered us $12 million in Series A funding, but because of what they saw in our business model that we hadn't fully realized ourselves. "You're not just building inventory software," said Victoria Sterling, the firm's managing partner, during our final presentation. "You're creating an ecosystem. These modules you've developed, inventory, scheduling, customer relationship management, financial reporting, they all integrate seamlessly. You're looking at small businesses that need enterprise solutions, but you're also looking at enterprise businesses that need scalable, modular systems." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with the kind of recognition that makes or breaks companies. "The Fortune 500 companies are going to want this technology, not just for their small suppliers, but for their own operational efficiency. You're building something that scales both ways, down to the corner store and up to the corporate boardroom." That's when I understood what we'd really built. Not just software, but a bridge. A solution that could serve everyone, from the local bakery to the multinational corporation. A technology platform that was about to disrupt an industry worth billions. The Sterling deal closed 2 weeks before Christmas. $12 million in funding, with additional capital available for expansion. Enough money to hire a proper development team, lease real office space, and begin the kind of scaling that Victoria Sterling had envisioned. While my family was planning their Christmas celebration around Natalie's latest achievement, a company car and a corner office, I was signing contracts that would put Next-Gen Solutions on a trajectory toward becoming one of the fastest-growing enterprise software companies on the West Coast. But I didn't tell them, not because I was being secretive, but because they'd stopped asking questions that would lead to real answers. When Mom called to ask if I'd received her Christmas card, she didn't ask about work. When Dad texted Happy New Year, he didn't inquire about my plans or goals. I'd become peripheral to their narrative, which was exactly where I needed to be. Because peripheral daughters don't get scrutinized when they start making moves that will reshape entire industries. Forgotten sisters don't get questioned when they begin building the kind of power that can't be ignored indefinitely. By January, Next-Gen Solutions had 15 employees and partnerships pending with 3 major consulting firms. By March, we were fielding acquisition inquiries from companies whose names would have made my family's dinner conversation stop cold. But the most interesting inquiry didn't come from a Silicon Valley giant or a traditional software corporation. It came from Meridian Technologies, the same company where Natalie had just been promoted to Director of Strategic Partnerships. The same company that had become the centerpiece of every family gathering I'd missed. They wanted to discuss a potential partnership. Something about integrating our solutions into their operational framework. Something about modernizing their technology infrastructure. Something that would require a formal presentation to their executive leadership team. I said yes to the meeting, but I didn't mention it to anyone in my family. Why would I? They'd made it clear that my work was too complicated, too risky, too different from what real professionals like Natalie did. Besides, I was curious to see how long I could remain invisible while standing directly in front of them. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, printed on heavy Meridian Technologies letterhead, with the kind of corporate formality that makes million-dollar deals feel routine. Next-Gen Solutions is cordially invited to present our enterprise software capabilities to the Meridian Technologies executive leadership team. Partnership evaluation meetings scheduled for Friday, May 18th, 2 p.m. Executive Conference Room A, Meridian Tower, Downtown Financial District. I stared at the invitation for a full minute, not because I was surprised by the formal language, but because of the address. Meridian Tower was 12 blocks from where I'd grown up. The same building I'd driven past countless times during high school, when it was just another corporate high-rise in a city full of glass and steel monuments to businesses I didn't understand. Now I understood. Now I was about to walk into that building not as someone's sister or daughter, but as the CEO of a company they wanted to work with. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. Riley Chen had scheduled the meeting through Meridian's business development department, following the same protocols we used for any potential enterprise client. Standard procedure: initial inquiry, capability assessment, formal presentation, negotiation, contract. We'd done this dance dozens of times, with companies across the Pacific Northwest. What wasn't standard was that I'd spent 28 years hearing about this particular company's holiday parties, quarterly reviews, and office politics through the filter of my sister's career updates. Big meeting on Friday, I mentioned to Kai during our Wednesday morning development stand-up. Meridian Technologies wants to see our enterprise integration capabilities. The Fortune 500 company? Devin looked up from his laptop. That's huge. Their technology infrastructure is supposedly a nightmare of legacy systems. If we can solve their integration problems, every similar company in their sector will want our solutions. He was right, of course. Meridian Technologies wasn't just another client opportunity. They were the kind of reference case that could transform Next-Gen Solutions from a successful regional company into a national enterprise software leader. What my team didn't know was that this meeting would also transform me from the invisible daughter into something my family couldn't ignore. I spent Thursday preparing with the kind of meticulous attention I'd learned during our early startup days, when every presentation could make or break our survival. Our proposal was comprehensive. A complete modernization of their inventory management, customer relationship systems, and operational reporting infrastructure. The kind of comprehensive overhaul that most companies approach in phases over several years. But we weren't proposing a partial solution. We were offering to revolutionize how they handled data, streamlined workflows, and integrated departments that had been operating in technological silos for decades. The financial projections were staggering. Implementation of our full suite could save Meridian Technologies an estimated $4 million annually in operational inefficiencies alone. Add the productivity gains from streamlined communication and automated reporting, and we were looking at potential value creation of $8 to $10 million per year. Friday morning, I dressed carefully. Not because I was nervous about the presentation. I delivered similar proposals to larger companies with more complex requirements, but because I wanted to look exactly like what I was, a successful CEO who'd built something valuable enough for Fortune 500 companies to pursue. Navy suit, perfectly tailored, Italian leather briefcase, conference materials printed on premium paper with the Next Gen Solutions logo embossed in silver. I looked like money, success, and competence, wrapped in a package that none of my family members would recognize. The Next Gen team met at our offices at noon for final preparation. Riley had prepared market analysis data that demonstrated how our solutions had transformed operational efficiency for similar companies. Kai brought interactive demos that would let the Meridian executives see our systems in action. Devin had technical specifications that proved our software could integrate with their existing infrastructure without disrupting ongoing operations. I brought something else. Complete professional detachment from the fact that I was about to walk into my sister's workplace and fundamentally alter the power dynamic that had defined our relationship for nearly 3 decades. "You seem calm," Riley observed as we loaded our presentation materials into the car. "Most CEOs get at least a little nervous before meetings this size." "I'm not nervous," I said, which was true. I wasn't nervous about the presentation. I was curious about what would happen when 2 worlds that had never been meant to collide suddenly found themselves in the same conference room. Meridian Tower was exactly as impressive as the business magazines claimed. 52 floors of glass and steel rising from the downtown financial district like a monument to corporate achievement. The lobby was marble and mahogany, with abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. We checked in with building security, received visitor badges, and took the elevator to the 47th floor, executive level. The elevator opened onto a reception area that screamed success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, contemporary furniture that looked like it belonged in an art museum, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that suggested important decisions were made here regularly. "Next Gen Solutions for the 2 p.m. meeting," I told the receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s who looked like she'd been hired specifically to make visitors feel either welcome or intimidated, depending on their net worth. "Of course, Ms. Hartwell. The leadership team is expecting you. Conference room A is just down this hall. Can I offer you coffee, water, anything while you wait?" "We're fine, thank you." Conference room A was a showcase of corporate power. 20-foot windows, a conference table that could seat 16 people, and wall-mounted screens for presentations that probably handled billion-dollar decisions monthly. The kind of room where careers were made and broken, where handshakes translated into stock price changes. We set up our presentation materials while we waited, testing the connection between Kai's laptop and the room's display system. Everything worked perfectly. Our slides looked professional on the enormous screen. The demo software responded smoothly to Riley's navigation. 5 minutes out, Riley announced, checking her phone. "Everyone ready?" I was checking my notes one final time when I heard voices in the hallway. corporate voices discussing quarterly metrics and strategic initiatives in the particular cadence of people who were accustomed to being listened to. Then I heard a laugh I recognized. Natalie's laugh, the same laugh that had echoed through childhood birthday parties and family dinners, the same laugh that had celebrated promotions and achievements while I sat quietly at the periphery. But this time, she was laughing outside the conference room where I was about to deliver a presentation that could change both of our lives forever. The door opened, and a group of executives filed in. Men and women in expensive suits carrying tablets and leather portfolios. The kind of people who made decisions that affected thousands of employees and millions in revenue. Natalie was the third person through the door. She was looking down at her tablet, probably reviewing notes about the mysterious next-gen solutions company they were about to evaluate for partnership. She looked exactly like what she was, a successful corporate executive in her element, confident and prepared. She looked up as she reached her seat. Our eyes met across the conference table. For one perfect moment, her expression was completely blank, not shocked, not surprised, just processing. Like her brain was trying to reconcile the presence of her older sister in her corporate boardroom with the reality she'd constructed where I was still struggling with my computer consulting hobby. Then her face went through a series of micro-expressions that I'd learned to read over 28 years of being her sister: confusion, recognition, realization, and finally, something that looked suspiciously like panic. But I didn't have time to analyze her reaction, because the man at the head of the table was already speaking. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm James Whitmore, Senior Vice President of Operations. Thank you for coming in today, Next Gen Solutions. We've been very impressed with your preliminary proposal, and we're excited to learn more about how your technology solutions might integrate with our operational goals. He gestured toward our team with the kind of practiced professionalism that suggested he'd conducted hundreds of similar meetings. Please introduce yourselves and tell us what you're going to show us today. Riley handled the team introductions while I watched Natalie try to process the fact that her older sister was apparently the CEO of a company that Meridian Technologies was actively pursuing for a major technology partnership. When Riley finished with our team overview, she turned to me with a smile. And I'd like you to meet our founder and CEO, Alexis Hartwell, who will be presenting our comprehensive enterprise solution today. The room turned to look at me expectantly, waiting for me to begin the presentation that would determine whether Next Gen Solutions became Meridian Technologies' newest strategic partner. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at my sister, who was staring at me like I'd just materialized from another dimension. Good afternoon, I said calmly, opening my presentation folder. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to showing you how next-gen solutions can transform your operational efficiency. Because after all these years of being invisible, I was finally ready to be seen. I was 3 slides into our operational efficiency analysis when James Whitmore interrupted me. I'm sorry, Ms. Hartwell, he said, leaning forward with the kind of focused attention that suggested something had just clicked in his mind. Before we continue, I have to ask, are you the Alexis Hartwell who developed the predictive inventory algorithm that Pacific Manufacturing implemented last year? The room went silent. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause. Yes, I said simply, that was one of our early implementations. Whitmore's expression shifted from professional interest to something approaching reverence. That case study has been circulating through operational leadership circles for months. The efficiency gains Pacific reported were extraordinary. 23% reduction in waste, 37% improvement in supply chain timing, and cost savings that exceeded their annual technology budget. He turned to the other executives around the table. This is the woman who built the system that's becoming the gold standard for predictive operations management. I could feel Natalie's stare burning into the side of my face, but I kept my attention on Whitmore as he continued speaking. Dr. Harrison from Pacific Manufacturing presented your solution at the Western Industry Leaders Conference last month. He called it the most innovative operational technology he'd seen in 20 years of corporate management. Whitmore paused, looking at his tablet. I believe his exact words were, quote, game-changing technology developed by the most impressive systems architect I've ever worked with. The validation hit the room like electricity. Suddenly, this wasn't just another vendor presentation. This was a meeting with the CEO, whose work was already being discussed in executive circles across the region. Furthermore, Whitmore continued, his voice gaining momentum, didn't Forbes include next-gen solutions in their Startups to Watch feature 3 months ago? Something about, quote, revolutionary enterprise software that's disrupting traditional operational management? I nodded. We were honored to be included in that piece. That's when Victoria Chen, the Chief Technology Officer, spoke up from the far end of the table. Wait, Next-Gen Solutions. You're the company that Sterling Investment Group called the most promising enterprise software investment of the decade in their quarterly report. Sterling's Series A investment has been very supportive of our growth, I acknowledged. The atmosphere in the room was changing rapidly. What had started as a routine vendor evaluation was transforming into something closer to a corporate courtship. These weren't just executives considering a technology purchase anymore. They were business leaders recognizing that they were in the presence of someone whose reputation preceded her. $12 million in Series A funding, murmured David Park, the chief financial officer, scrolling through what looked like financial data on his tablet. Series B discussions already underway with 3 major firms. Revenue growth projections that put you on track for IPO consideration within 18 months. He looked up from his screen with the expression of someone who'd just realized they were sitting across from a potential industry titan. Miss Hartwell, I'll be frank. We weren't expecting to be meeting with a CEO whose company is generating this level of investor interest and market recognition. I could see Natalie out of my peripheral vision, her face cycling through expressions I'd never seen before. This wasn't the sister who made jokes about my computer consulting. This wasn't the daughter whose achievements had always overshadowed mine at family gatherings. This was a corporate executive slowly realizing that her older sister had built something extraordinary while she wasn't paying attention. The preliminary proposal you submitted, said Sarah Martinez, VP of Strategic Development, suggested integration capabilities that frankly seemed too comprehensive to be realistic. But given your track record with Pacific Manufacturing and the recognition from industry leaders, she trailed off, then continued with growing excitement. You're not talking about incremental improvements to our existing systems. You're proposing a complete operational transformation that could fundamentally change how Meridian Technologies functions. That's exactly what we're proposing, I confirmed. Your current systems are costing you approximately $4 million annually in inefficiencies alone. Our integrated solution wouldn't just address those losses. It would create new operational capabilities that don't currently exist in your industry. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. This isn't a vendor presentation. This is a strategic partnership opportunity with one of the most innovative companies in enterprise software. The shift in the room's energy was palpable. These executives had come expecting to evaluate a technology purchase. Instead, they'd discovered that a rising star in the tech industry was offering to transform their entire operational infrastructure. But the moment that changed everything came when Thomas Richardson, the Chief Operating Officer, looked up from his phone with an expression of amazement. I just received a text from my counterpart at Global Tech Industries, he announced. Apparently, they've been trying to schedule a meeting with Next-Gen Solutions for 3 months. Their CEO told him, and I quote, whatever it takes to get Alexis Hartwell to consider working with us. The silence that followed was deafening. Richardson continued, his voice filled with disbelief. Global Tech's annual revenue is $15 billion. Their CEO doesn't personally pursue technology partnerships, unless... He stopped, staring at me with new understanding. Ms. Hartwell, exactly how significant is your company's position in the enterprise software market? Before I could answer, Natalie spoke for the first time since entering the room. Her voice was small, almost whispered. Alexis? The entire table turned to look at her. For the first time in my life, I watched my sister struggle for words in a professional setting. You know Ms. Hartwell? Whitmore asked, clearly confused by the personal familiarity in Natalie's tone. Natalie looked around the table at her colleagues. People who had just spent 10 minutes discussing my company's revolutionary impact on their industry, my recognition by Forbes, my multi-million-dollar funding rounds, my pursuit by billion-dollar corporations. Then she looked back at me and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before, the dawning realization that she had fundamentally misunderstood who I was and what I'd become. "She's my sister," Natalie said quietly. The room exploded into surprised murmurs and exchanged glances. Suddenly, the executives were looking between Natalie and me like they were trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Your sister?" Richardson repeated, incredulous. "Natalie, you never mentioned that your sister was the CEO of Next Gen Solutions." Natalie started, then stopped. How could she explain that she'd never mentioned it because she'd never known? How could she tell her colleagues that while they were discussing my industry recognition and revolutionary technology, she'd thought I was still struggling with a computer consulting hobby? How could she admit that the sister she'd dismissed for years had become someone her own company was desperate to work with? Whitmore was staring at Natalie with the kind of confusion reserved for situations that don't make logical sense. "Natalie, you're our Director of Strategic Partnerships. Identifying and cultivating relationships with innovative technology companies is literally your job description. How did you not know that your own sister was running one of the most promising enterprise software companies in the region?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Because the answer was simple and devastating. Natalie hadn't known because she'd never bothered to ask. None of them had. They'd been so busy celebrating her achievements and dismissing mine that they'd completely missed the fact that I'd built something extraordinary. I watched my sister sit in a room full of her colleagues, people who respected her professional judgment and strategic insight, trying to explain why she'd failed to recognize that her own family member was exactly the kind of innovative partner their company needed. And for the first time in 28 years, Natalie had no explanation that wouldn't make her look either incompetent or willfully blind. The recognition moment I'd waited for my entire life wasn't happening in a family setting where they could dismiss my achievements or diminish my success. It was happening in a corporate boardroom where my value was being measured by people who understood exactly what I'd built and exactly what it was worth. And my sister was finally seeing me the way the rest of the business world already did, as someone whose expertise they couldn't afford to ignore. The silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds. I know because I counted, watching the digital clock on the conference room wall tick forward, while 9 corporate executives waited for someone to explain how a director of strategic partnerships had somehow missed that her own sister was running one of the most sought-after technology companies in their market. I could have said something. I could have explained the years of dismissal, the canceled birthday, the pattern of being treated as invisible, while Natalie's career became the family's central narrative. I could have detailed how they'd called my work a computer hobby, while I was building solutions that Fortune 500 companies were desperate to implement. Instead, I smiled, not smugly, not triumphantly, but with the calm confidence of someone who no longer needed to justify their worth to people who had finally discovered it for themselves. "Family dynamics can be complicated," I said gently, looking directly at Natalie. "Sometimes we don't see what's right in front of us." It was gracious, professional, and completely devastating in its restraint. Whitmore cleared his throat, clearly struggling to process the interpersonal undercurrents while maintaining meeting momentum. "Well, this is unexpected. But regardless of family connections, we're here to evaluate next-gen solutions based on business merit." He looked around the table at his colleagues, who were still exchanging glances that suggested they were reassessing everything they thought they knew about their Director of Strategic Partnerships. "Shall we continue with the presentation?" I nodded and clicked to the next slide. which displayed a comprehensive integration timeline that would transform Meridian's entire operational infrastructure over 18 months. My voice remained steady, professional, completely unaffected by the personal drama that had just exploded in the middle of their conference room. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. The executives weren't just listening to a vendor pitch anymore. They were absorbing information from someone whose professional reputation had just been validated in the most dramatic way possible, while simultaneously questioning the judgment of their own strategic partnerships director. Phase 1 implementation would begin with your inventory management systems, I explained, using the laser pointer to highlight specific integration points. Our analysis indicates this alone would generate cost savings of approximately $1.2 million in the first 6 months. Victoria Chen, the CTO, leaned forward with renewed focus. The predictive algorithms you've developed, can they adapt to our seasonal fluctuations and regional variations? Absolutely. The machine learning components analyze historical patterns, seasonal trends, and regional data to create predictive models that become more accurate over time. Pacific Manufacturing saw prediction accuracy improve from 71% to 94% within 8 months of implementation. 94%? David Park, the CFO, looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone who just discovered a treasure map. Do you have documentation of those results? Riley Chen smoothly stepped forward with a bound report. Complete case study, including third-party verification of results and financial impact analysis. I watched Natalie from my peripheral vision as her colleagues absorbed information about technology solutions that were apparently revolutionizing operational efficiency across multiple industries. Solutions built by the sister she'd thought was struggling with computer consulting. The questions kept coming, each one more sophisticated than the last. These weren't executives going through the motions of a vendor evaluation anymore. They were business leaders recognizing a strategic opportunity that could fundamentally change their competitive position. The integration with existing ERP systems, asked Thomas Richardson, how do you handle data migration without disrupting ongoing operations? I spent 15 minutes explaining our phased migration approach, the backup protocols we'd developed, and the training programs that ensured smooth transitions. Every answer demonstrated not just technical expertise, but the kind of deep operational understanding that comes from successfully implementing complex solutions for major corporations. Ms. Hartwell, said Sarah Martinez, I have to ask, what's your implementation capacity? If we move forward with this partnership, are you able to dedicate the necessary resources to a project of this scope? It was the question I'd been waiting for. The one that would demonstrate exactly how far next-gen solutions had evolved beyond their assumptions. We currently have implementation teams working with 4 Fortune 500 companies and 12 mid-market organizations, I replied calmly. Our development team has grown to 47 people, with dedicated project managers for enterprise implementations. For a partnership with Meridian Technologies, we would assign a dedicated team of 8 specialists, including a senior implementation manager who would work exclusively on your project. The numbers hit the room like a physical force. 47 employees, multiple Fortune 500 clients, dedicated enterprise teams. This wasn't a startup struggling for credibility. This was a rapidly growing company with the infrastructure to handle major corporate partnerships. Whitmore was staring at his tablet, clearly cross-referencing something. Ms. Hartwell, according to the information I'm seeing here, Next-Gen Solutions' revenue growth rate puts you in the top 5% of enterprise software companies for scaling speed. We've been fortunate to work with clients who see the value in operational transformation, I said, maintaining the understated professionalism that was clearly driving Natalie towards some kind of internal crisis. Because that's what was happening. I could see it in the way she was gripping her pen, the way her eyes kept darting between me and her colleagues, the way she was realizing that every question they asked revealed another layer of success she'd been completely unaware of. Her colleagues were discovering that her sister had built exactly the kind of innovative company they'd been trying to identify and partner with for months. Meanwhile, she was discovering that her sister had become exactly the kind of industry leader she'd been hired to cultivate relationships with. The irony was so perfect it felt choreographed. The financial projections you've provided, Park continued, assume full implementation within 18 months. What guarantees can you offer regarding timeline and performance metrics? I opened my portfolio to the contract framework we'd prepared. We provide performance guarantees with penalty clauses for timeline delays. If we don't deliver the promised efficiency gains within the specified timeframe, we refund a percentage of implementation costs. It's a standard part of our enterprise agreements. Performance guarantees, Richardson repeated, impressed. How many companies are willing to stake their revenue on promised results? Companies that are confident in their technology, I replied simply. The presentation continued for another 40 minutes, with each slide demonstrating capabilities that exceeded their initial expectations. By the time I reached the financial summary, the executives were asking questions about implementation start dates, rather than whether they wanted to move forward. But the most telling moment came when Whitmore turned to Natalie during a brief break while my team set up the final demo. Natalie, I'm curious about your perspective on this partnership opportunity, given your unique insight into next-gen solutions leadership. The question was professionally phrased, but the subtext was clear. How do you evaluate a business partnership with your own sister, whom you apparently know nothing about professionally? Natalie looked around the table at her colleagues, who were all waiting for her expert assessment of a company run by someone she'd never taken seriously enough to understand what she actually did for a living. I think, she started, then stopped. I think Next Gen Solutions presents exactly the kind of innovative partnership opportunity we've been looking for. It was the most diplomatic non-answer possible, and everyone in the room knew it. What she couldn't say was the truth. That she'd spent years dismissing my work without ever bothering to understand what I was building. That she'd been so focused on her own career advancement that she'd never noticed her sister was creating solutions that her own company desperately needed. That while she'd been climbing the corporate ladder at Meridian Technologies, I'd been building the kind of company that could revolutionize how organizations like Meridian operated. But her colleagues didn't need her to say it. They could see it in her discomfort, in her inability to provide the kind of strategic insight they'd come to expect from their director of strategic partnerships. And in that moment, something shifted that went beyond just the business opportunity. For the first time in our lives, I was the sister with the expertise they needed, and Natalie was the one struggling to keep up with a conversation about work that actually mattered. The demo concluded with sustained applause from the executive team. Not polite corporate appreciation, but genuine excitement about technology that could transform their operational capabilities. And I remained exactly where I'd been throughout the entire presentation. Calm, professional, and completely unaffected by the personal drama unfolding around the edges of a business meeting that was about to change both of our lives forever. The meeting ended at 4:17 p.m. with handshakes, business cards, and the kind of enthusiasm that precedes million-dollar partnerships. But the real show began the moment my team and I left conference room A. I was collecting my presentation materials when I heard Whitmore's voice through the slightly open door behind us. Natalie, can you stay behind for a moment? We need to discuss the strategic implications of this partnership opportunity. The tone was professional, but there was an edge to it that suggested this wasn't going to be a casual debriefing session. As we waited for the elevator, I could hear the muffled sound of serious conversation coming from the conference room we'd just vacated. That went incredibly well, Riley said as the elevator doors closed. They're going to want to move forward immediately. Did you see Richardson's face when you mentioned the performance guarantees? He looked like he'd just found buried treasure. Kai was grinning. The CTO asked more technical questions than most clients ask in 3 meetings. She's already thinking about implementation phases. But I was thinking about something else entirely. I was thinking about how information travels in corporate environments, and how the news that Meridian Technologies was pursuing a partnership with a company run by their own director of strategic partnerships' previously unknown CEO sister was about to spread through the building like wildfire. We were crossing the lobby when my phone buzzed with the first text. Unknown number. Is this the Alexis Hartwell who just presented at Meridian Technologies? This is Jennifer Walsh, Senior VP at Consolidated Industries. We need to talk. Before I could respond to the first message, 2 more arrived. Another unknown number. Ms. Hartwell, this is Marcus Thompson from Regional Business Journal. I'd like to schedule an interview about your company's expansion into Fortune 500 partnerships. And then a third. Alexis, it's David Chen from Pinnacle Ventures, heard through industry channels that you're revolutionizing enterprise software. Coffee this week? How did word get out so fast? Devin asked, reading over my shoulder as we reached the parking garage. The answer became clear 20 minutes later when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my cousin Emma's number. Alexis? Oh my God, Alexis, is it true? Trevor just called me and said that Natalie posted something on social media about you being the CEO of some major tech company. He said their entire office is talking about it. I put the phone on speaker so my team could hear the evolution of what was clearly becoming a much larger story. Emma, what exactly did Natalie post? She shared an article from some business website, something about next-gen solutions securing major partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. And she tagged you in it with a comment about being proud of her sister's achievements. But Alexis, everyone is confused because none of us knew you were running a company. Like, a real company, with employees and everything. Riley started laughing. Your sister is doing damage control in real time. It was brilliant, actually. Natalie had recognized immediately that the story of her ignorance about her own sister's success would reflect poorly on her professional reputation. So she was getting ahead of the narrative by publicly celebrating achievements she'd had no idea existed an hour earlier. My phone buzzed with Instagram notifications, Facebook alerts, LinkedIn connection requests. The social media ripple effect was beginning. But the real ripple effect was happening inside Meridian Technologies, and I discovered its scope when my phone rang again 30 minutes later. Ms. Hartwell? This is Janet Morrison, Executive Assistant to CEO William Ashford at Meridian Technologies. Mr. Ashford would like to schedule a meeting with you at your earliest convenience to discuss accelerating the partnership evaluation process. The CEO. Not the operational team we'd presented to, but the actual chief executive officer of a Fortune 500 company wanted to meet personally to discuss moving our partnership forward. Ms. Morrison, I'm available next week for a preliminary discussion. Actually, Mr. Ashford was hoping to meet tomorrow morning. He's rearranged his schedule to accommodate this opportunity. Would 9 a.m. work for you? Tomorrow morning. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company had rearranged his schedule to meet with me less than 24 hours after our initial presentation. Tomorrow morning works perfectly. After I hung up, my team stared at me with the kind of awe usually reserved for witnessing natural phenomena. The CEO, Kai said slowly, cleared his calendar to meet with us. Tomorrow, Riley added, not next week, not next month, tomorrow. But the ripples were spreading beyond just Meridian Technologies. My phone had been buzzing continuously with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Business journalists wanting interviews. Investment firms requesting meetings. Other Fortune 500 companies asking about partnership opportunities. Word of our Meridian presentation had somehow triggered a cascade of interest that was transforming our company's visibility overnight. The explanation came in a text from Victoria Sterling, our lead investor. Alexis, my contacts in the tech industry are buzzing about next-gen solutions. Word is spreading that you've developed something truly disruptive. My phone hasn't stopped ringing with inquiries from companies wanting introductions. What did you do at that meeting today? What we'd done was prove our technology's value to exactly the right audience. Corporate executives. Talk to other corporate executives. When the leadership team at a respected Fortune 500 company gets excited about a technology solution, That excitement spreads through professional networks faster than industry gossip. But there was another ripple effect happening that was more personal and infinitely more satisfying. My phone rang at 6:30 p.m., Mom's number. "Alexis, honey, your father and I just saw Natalie's post about your company. We had no idea you were doing so well with your business. She says you're working with major corporations now?" For 28 years, I'd waited for that tone of voice. Not dismissive, not distracted, but genuinely impressed and slightly apologetic. "Things have been going well," I said simply. "Natalie sent us some articles about your company. Forbes magazine wrote about you, and you have 47 employees. Sweetheart, why didn't you tell us?" The question hung in the air between us. Why hadn't I told them? Because for years, they'd made it clear they weren't interested in hearing about my work. Because they'd called it a hobby, a phase, something that would eventually be abandoned for something more practical, like Natalie's career path. "I wasn't sure you'd be interested," I said, which was both true and diplomatic. "Not interested? Alexis, your sister says you're one of the most successful technology entrepreneurs in the region. Of course we're interested. We're your parents." But they hadn't been interested when I was struggling through the early stages of building that success. They'd only become interested now that external validation had made my achievements impossible to dismiss. "Would you like to have dinner this weekend?" Mom continued. "Your father and I would love to hear about everything you've been working on. And maybe you could explain what your company actually does?" Natalie tried to tell us, but she said the technology is too complex for her to understand completely. Too complex for Natalie to understand. The same Natalie who was Meridian Technologies' Director of Strategic Partnerships, whose job was literally to understand and evaluate technology companies for potential partnerships. "Dinner this weekend sounds nice," I said. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment looking at the dozen missed calls, 37 unread texts, and 86 email notifications that had accumulated since our presentation ended. In 6 hours, the story had gone from Meridian Technologies evaluates partnership opportunity to Regional Tech CEO reveals family connection during major corporate presentation to Next Gen Solutions becomes hottest enterprise software company in Pacific Northwest. The ripple effect was transforming not just my business prospects, but the entire narrative about who I was and what I'd accomplished. For the first time in my life, my achievements were being discussed by people who mattered. Potential clients, industry leaders, investors, and yes, finally, my own family. But the most interesting call came at 8:45 p.m. from a number I almost didn't answer. "Alexis? It's Natalie. I know you're probably busy, but I was wondering if we could talk. There are some things I need to say." For the first time in years, my sister was asking for my attention instead of assuming she deserved it. The ripples had reached everyone, including the person who'd started them, by finally seeing what had been right in front of her all along. The meeting with CEO William Ashford lasted 3 hours and ended with a handshake that would transform Next Gen Solutions into the primary technology partner for a Fortune 500 company with annual revenues exceeding $8 billion. But it was the conversation afterward that revealed the true scope of what my family had missed while they were busy celebrating Natalie's corporate climbing. "Ms. Hartwell," Ashford said as we concluded the contract discussion, "I have to ask, how long have you been developing enterprise software solutions?" "About 4 years of serious development, but I've been building systems and studying operational efficiency since college." He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with the expression of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. 4 years. In 4 years, you've built something that our technology assessment team says could revolutionize how Fortune 500 companies handle operational management. Do you realize how extraordinary that is? I did realize it, actually. But I also realized that while I'd been building something extraordinary, my family had been telling anyone who would listen that I was wasting my potential on a computer hobby that would never amount to anything meaningful. The contrast became even more stark when I returned to the office and found Riley waiting with a stack of printouts and a grin that suggested she'd discovered something fascinating. I've been doing some research, she announced, spreading the papers across my desk. After yesterday's reaction from the Meridian team, I wanted to understand exactly how significant our market position has become. The first document was a comparative analysis of enterprise software companies in the Pacific Northwest. NextGen Solutions was ranked third in innovation metrics, fifth in growth rate, and seventh in overall market impact. In 4 years, we'd climbed into the top tier of an industry that typically took decades to establish meaningful positions in. But here's the really interesting part, Riley continued, pulling out a second set of documents. I looked into Meridian Technologies' strategic partnerships over the past 5 years. Companies they've worked with, technology solutions they've implemented, their track record with innovation adoption. She spread out a timeline that showed Meridian's partnership history, major consulting firms, established software corporations, traditional enterprise solution providers, with decades of industry experience and client bases in the hundreds. Until yesterday, Riley said, pointing to the most recent entry on the timeline, they had never pursued a partnership with a company less than 15 years old. They had never worked with a startup. They had never invested in unproven technology from an emerging company. The implications hit me immediately. Meridian Technologies didn't take risks on innovative companies. They worked with established, traditional providers who offered incremental improvements to existing systems. But they were pursuing next-gen solutions with an urgency that suggested we'd developed something they considered essential to their future competitiveness. There's more, Riley said, pulling out a third document. I called our contact at Pacific Manufacturing and asked about the industry response to their implementation of our systems. Pacific Manufacturing had become something of a legend in operational efficiency circles after implementing our predictive inventory management system. Their cost savings and productivity gains had exceeded every projection, creating results that other companies in their sector were desperately trying to replicate. 7 companies have attempted to duplicate Pacific's results using traditional enterprise software solutions, Riley continued. None of them have achieved even 50% of the efficiency gains that Pacific reported. 3 of them have contacted Pacific directly asking for information about their technology partner. She handed me a printed email from Pacific's CEO, Dr. Harrison, that she'd requested permission to share. Ms. Chen, in 30 years of corporate leadership, I have never encountered technology that delivered results as dramatic as what NextGen Solutions created for our operations. Your team didn't just solve our inventory problems, they revolutionized our entire approach to operational management. I've had colleagues from Fortune 500 companies contact me specifically to ask about your CEO's methodology and whether her company might be available for consulting on their own operational challenges. I stared at the email, processing the disconnect between Dr. Harrison's assessment of my work and my family's long-held belief that I was struggling with a computer consulting hobby that would never generate meaningful income. While they'd been worrying about my impractical career choices, Fortune 500 CEOs had been asking other Fortune 500 CEOs about my methodology and whether my company might be available for consulting. Riley wasn't finished. She pulled out a final document that made the contrast even more overwhelming. I also researched Natalie's career progression at Meridian Technologies, she said carefully, not to be invasive but to understand the context of yesterday's meeting. The document showed Natalie's 5-year trajectory at Meridian. Starting position, marketing coordinator. Current position, director of strategic partnerships. Salary progression, $45,000 to $127,000. Achievements, successful management of 12 technology partnerships, implementation of new vendor evaluation protocols, recognition as rising star in the company's leadership development program. Impressive achievements by any measure. Solid, consistent corporate progression that demonstrated competence, dedication, and professional growth. But then Riley showed me the comparative analysis that put Natalie's career accomplishments in perspective with what I'd built over the same time period. While Natalie had progressed from coordinator to director and increased her salary by $82,000 over 5 years, NextGen Solutions had grown from a 4-person startup to a 47-employee company valued at over $60 million. While she'd managed 12 technology partnerships worth approximately $15 million in aggregate value to Meridian, I'd created technology solutions that had generated over $40 million in operational savings for our clients. While she'd received recognition as a rising star within her company, I'd been featured in Forbes, pursued by major investment firms, and acknowledged by industry leaders as someone who was fundamentally changing how enterprise operations were managed. The contrast wasn't just significant, it was staggering. But the most revealing comparison was something Riley had discovered by accident while researching Meridian's partnership evaluation process. Natalie's job description includes identifying emerging technology companies with disruptive potential for strategic partnerships, Riley said, reading from what appeared to be an internal Meridian document. She's specifically responsible for monitoring the regional tech scene for innovative companies that could provide competitive advantages. Riley looked up from the document with an expression that suggested she'd found the most ironic discovery of all. Alexis, your sister's job, her actual professional responsibility, was to identify companies exactly like yours and recommend them for partnerships exactly like the one we just negotiated. The silence that followed was profound. For 5 years, while I had been building NextGen Solutions from a startup idea into a major enterprise software company, Natalie had been working in a role that should have made her aware of exactly what I was accomplishing. She hadn't missed my achievements because she was busy with her own career. She'd missed them because she'd never bothered to look beyond her assumption that her older sister was struggling with an impractical computer hobby. And that assumption had caused her to overlook the fact that her own company desperately needed exactly what I'd been building. "There's one more thing," Riley said quietly. "I found the internal Meridian memo that initiated their search for enterprise software partnerships 6 months ago." She handed me a document marked Confidential Strategic Planning Initiative. The memo detailed Meridian's recognition that their operational systems were becoming a competitive liability. They needed innovative technology solutions to maintain market position. They needed partnerships with companies that could provide revolutionary, rather than evolutionary improvements. The memo specifically mentioned that they were looking for emerging companies with disruptive technology rather than established vendors with incremental solutions. 6 months ago, Meridian Technologies had identified exactly the kind of company they needed to partner with for future competitiveness. And Natalie, whose job was to identify those companies, had never once considered that her own sister might be running exactly what they were looking for. While my family had been celebrating her promotion to Director of Strategic Partnerships, she'd been failing to recognize the most strategic partnership opportunity that had ever walked into her professional sphere. The irony was so complete it felt like fiction. But the most important realization wasn't about the contrast between our achievements or the irony of her professional oversight. It was about the fact that while they'd been building their entire family narrative around her success and my failure, I'd been quietly building something that rendered their narrative completely obsolete. The daughter they'd written off as impractical had become someone whose work was being studied by Fortune 500 companies. The sister they'd dismissed as unsuccessful had created more value in 4 years than most companies create in decades. And the family member they'd considered a disappointment had just negotiated a partnership that would make her one of the most influential technology leaders in the region. The contrast wasn't just numerical, it was existential. Everything they thought they knew about success, achievement, and family hierarchy had just been revealed as fundamentally incorrect. The call came at 7:22 a.m. on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the Meridian partnership announcement had been featured on the front page of the Regional Business Journal. I was reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant buzzed through. "Ms. Hartwell, I have William Ashford from Meridian Technologies on line 1. He says it's urgent." Urgent calls from Fortune 500 CEOs at 7:22 a.m. usually meant one of two things. extraordinary opportunity, or significant crisis. Given the tone in my assistant's voice, I suspected this wasn't about opportunity. "Alexis, thank God you're in early," Ashford said the moment I picked up. "We have a situation that requires your immediate expertise. How quickly can you get to our headquarters?" "What kind of situation?" "The kind that could cost us $15 million in the next 48 hours if we don't solve it." 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Ashford's corner office overlooking the financial district, listening to a crisis that perfectly illustrated how completely the power dynamic had shifted. Meridian's largest manufacturing client, Consolidated Industries, was threatening to terminate their contract due to operational failures that were directly related to the outdated technology systems we were supposed to upgrade. The systems that Natalie, as Director of Strategic Partnerships, had been responsible for modernizing over the past 2 years. "The client is furious," Ashford explained, pacing behind his desk with the kind of controlled desperation that suggested his company's reputation was hanging in the balance. "Their production efficiency has declined 23% over the past 6 months due to system integration failures. They're demanding immediate solutions, or they're pulling a contract worth $15 million annually." He stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Alexis, your technology is the only solution we have that can address their operational requirements within their timeline. Without next-gen solutions, we lose the contract. Without that contract, we're looking at our first quarterly loss in 8 years." The dependency was complete and explicit. Meridian Technologies, the company where my sister had built her career celebrating incremental achievements, now needed the technology I'd developed to prevent a catastrophic business failure. But the situation was about to become even more personally complicated. "There's another issue," Ashford continued. "Consolidated Industries has specifically requested that you personally oversee the implementation. They've researched your background and want the CEO who created the Pacific manufacturing solution to handle their account directly." "That's not typically how we structure enterprise implementations," I said carefully. "I know, but they're insisting. And frankly, after seeing what you accomplished in our initial assessment, I understand why they want you specifically involved." He handed me a folder marked Consolidated Industries Critical Timeline. "The client meeting is scheduled for Thursday, 2 days from now. They want a comprehensive solution presentation and a guaranteed timeline for resolving their operational issues." I opened the folder and immediately understood why this situation was more complex than a typical client crisis. Consolidated Industries wasn't just any manufacturing company. They were Meridian's flagship client, the partnership that Natalie had spent 2 years cultivating and that had become the centerpiece of her professional portfolio. The partnership that was now failing specifically because of technological limitations that my company could solve. "Who from your team will be presenting with me?" I asked. Ashford's expression became carefully neutral. "Given the scope of the technology issues involved, we think it's best if you present the technical solutions, while Natalie handles the relationship management aspects. She's been their primary contact for 2 years and understands their operational concerns." The irony was breathtaking. My sister, who had spent years dismissing my work as a computer hobby, was now going to be dependent on my expertise to save the most important client relationship of her career. But the dependency reversal went deeper than just this crisis. Over the following 48 hours, as I prepared for the Consolidated Industries presentation, 3 more situations emerged that demonstrated how thoroughly the professional dynamic had shifted. First, Meridian's internal technology assessment team requested my consultation on their digital transformation strategy. The same company where Natalie had been promoted for her strategic partnership expertise was now acknowledging that they needed my guidance to determine which technologies were worth investing in. Second, 2 of Meridian's other major clients had specifically asked to meet with me after learning about our partnership. Not with their account managers, not with Meridian's strategic team, but with the CEO of Next Gen Solutions, whose innovations they wanted to understand for their own operations. Third, and most revealing, I received a call from Marcus Webb, Meridian's Chief Strategy Officer, asking if I would consider joining their board of advisors to help guide their technology integration initiatives going forward. Alexis, I'll be direct, Webb said during our phone conversation. Your expertise in operational technology has become essential to our competitive strategy. We need your insights not just for specific implementations but for long-term strategic planning. A board position. At the Fortune 500 company where my sister worked, where her career had been built on the assumption that she understood strategic partnerships better than anyone in her family. But the most telling moment came Wednesday evening, when my phone rang with Natalie's number. Alexis, I know you're busy preparing for tomorrow's presentation, but I wanted to talk to you about the Consolidated Industries situation. Her voice had a quality I'd never heard before. Not the confident, slightly patronizing tone she'd used when discussing my work in the past, but something that sounded suspiciously like nervousness. What specifically did you want to discuss? Well, this account it's really important to me professionally. And I know you're going to present solutions that could save the relationship, but I'm hoping we can coordinate our approaches so that the client sees Meridian as a unified partner. She was asking for my help, not demanding it, not assuming she deserved it, but actually asking. Natalie, are you concerned about something specific? There was a pause. Then, quietly, I'm concerned that when they see what your technology can do, they're going to wonder why we didn't implement it 2 years ago, when I first started managing their account. The admission hung between us. She was worried that my solution would make her previous technology recommendations look inadequate, that her professional competence would be questioned when it became obvious that the problems they were experiencing could have been prevented if she'd identified the right technology partner earlier. The sister who had spent years assuming she understood business better than I did was now afraid that my expertise would expose the limitations of her professional judgment. The goal is to solve their operational problems, I said diplomatically. How that reflects on anyone's previous decisions isn't my primary concern. I know. Alexis, this account represents almost 40% of my annual performance metrics. If we lose Consolidated Industries, it significantly impacts my career trajectory. For the first time in our lives, Natalie needed me more than I needed her. Her professional success was now dependent on my ability to solve problems that she hadn't been able to address through traditional partnership approaches. The Thursday presentation went exactly as expected. Consolidated Industries was impressed by NextGen's technology solutions, agreed to the implementation timeline, and committed to continuing their partnership with Meridian Technologies based specifically on our operational improvements. But the real revelation came during the client dinner afterward, when James Patterson, Consolidated CEO, pulled me aside. Ms. Hartwell, I have to ask, how long has Meridian had access to your technology solutions? We finalized our partnership about a month ago. Patterson looked confused. A month ago? But we've been experiencing these operational issues for over a year. Why didn't Meridian propose your solutions earlier? The question I'd been waiting for. The one that would force everyone to confront the fact that Natalie had missed identifying the technology partnership that could have prevented this crisis entirely. You'd have to ask their strategic partnerships team about their evaluation timeline, I said carefully. But Patterson was smart enough to read between the lines. He understood that Meridian hadn't proposed our solutions earlier because they hadn't been aware that solutions like ours existed until very recently. Later that evening, as we debriefed the successful presentation, Ashford made an observation that crystallized the new reality. Alexis, I'm going to be honest with you. Your technology doesn't just solve problems for our clients. It's becoming essential to our ability to compete in the market. Companies are starting to expect the kind of operational efficiency that only your solutions can provide. He paused, then continued with the kind of directness that suggested he'd been thinking about this for weeks. We don't just want to partner with NextGen Solutions. We need to partner with you. Our future competitiveness depends on access to innovations that you're creating. The dependency reversal was complete. The Fortune 500 company that had employed my sister for 5 years, where she'd built her career and professional identity, now needed my expertise more than I needed their partnership. And Natalie, who had spent years positioning herself as the family's business expert, was now professionally dependent on the sister she'd never taken seriously enough to understand what she was actually building. The dinner invitation arrived exactly 1 week after we'd saved the Consolidated Industries account. Handwritten on my mother's best stationery, the kind she reserved for hosting her book club or announcing significant family events. Alexis, darling, the family would be honored to host a celebration dinner for your remarkable business achievements. Saturday evening, 6 p.m. We've invited the extended family to properly recognize your success. Please let us know if you can attend. Love, Mom and Dad. I stared at the invitation for a long moment, absorbing the language choices. Honored to host, properly recognize, remarkable achievements. The same achievements they'd dismissed as a computer hobby for 4 years were now remarkable and deserving of proper recognition from the family, who had never bothered to ask what I was actually building. But the timing wasn't coincidental. 3 days earlier, the Regional Business Journal had published a feature article titled, "Local Tech CEO Saves Fortune 500 Partnership," with a photograph of me shaking hands with the CEO of Consolidated Industries. The article detailed how NextGen Solutions had prevented a $15 million contract loss for Meridian Technologies through innovative operational technology. My family had read about my professional impact in the newspaper because they'd never bothered to learn about it from me directly. I called my mother that evening. "Alexis, oh sweetheart, we're so excited you called. Did you get our invitation? Your father has been telling everyone about your success story. We had no idea you were working with such important companies." "Mom, I appreciate the invitation, but I need to be clear about something. If we're going to have family dinners going forward, there are going to be some new expectations." Silence. Then, carefully, what kind of expectations? First, professional respect. My work isn't a hobby or a phase or something that needs to be explained in simple terms for family understanding. It's a multi-million-dollar enterprise that employs 47 people and serves Fortune 500 clients. When you discuss it, you'll discuss it with the same respect you've always shown for Natalie's corporate position. I could hear her processing this, probably wondering when her accommodating older daughter had developed such firm boundaries. Second, equal treatment. If there are family celebrations for career achievements, they'll include everyone's achievements proportionally. Not token acknowledgement followed by extended focus on whoever you're most proud of that particular month. "Alexis, honey, we've always been proud of both of our daughters. Mom, you canceled my birthday dinner for Natalie's promotion party. You gave me electronics store gift cards while giving her designer accessories for Christmas. You've interrupted my career updates to ask about her performance reviews. That's not equal treatment, and it's not going to continue." The silence stretched longer this time. Third, information boundaries. You don't get to be excited about my success now that it's been validated by external recognition while simultaneously expecting me to forget years of dismissal. If you want to be involved in my professional life going forward, you'll need to acknowledge that your previous assessment of my potential was incorrect. We never meant to dismiss your work, sweetheart, we just didn't understand. You didn't understand because you didn't ask. You made assumptions and built family narratives around those assumptions. That's a choice you made, and it had consequences. I let that settle before continuing. Fourth, no retroactive pride. You don't get to claim you always knew I'd be successful or always believed in my potential. You get to acknowledge that you were wrong, apologize for the dismissal, and earn your way back into being trusted with information about my life. My mother's voice was smaller when she responded. What would you need from us to earn that trust back? The question surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness, justification, or the usual family pattern of minimizing conflict by changing the subject. But she was actually asking what accountability looked like. Honest acknowledgement of the pattern, recognition that your treatment of my career versus Natalie's career was different and unfair, and commitment to treating both of your daughter's achievements with equal respect going forward. And if we do that, you'll come to family dinners again? If you do that consistently over time, we can rebuild a relationship that's based on mutual respect rather than me competing for scraps of attention. The conversation with my father was shorter but more direct. Alexis, your mother told me about your requirements for family relationships going forward. They're not requirements, Dad. They're boundaries. You can choose whether or not to respect them. Some of the things you've said about how we treated your career, that might be fair criticism. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received from him. I appreciate you acknowledging that. Your sister called us yesterday. She said you saved her biggest client account and that her colleagues are very impressed with your technology company. There it was. The reason for this sudden family recognition. Natalie had needed me professionally, and that need had forced them to reevaluate their dismissive attitude toward my work. Dad, I need you to understand something. I didn't build next-gen solutions to prove anything to this family. I built it because I saw problems that needed solving, and I had ideas about how to solve them. The fact that it became successful doesn't change the years when you treated it like a frivolous hobby. We should have asked more questions about what you were working on. Yes, you should have. And we should have been more supportive when you were starting your company. Yes, you should have. The simplicity of the acknowledgement was more powerful than elaborate apologies would have been. But the most important conversation was with Natalie herself. She called 2 days before the scheduled family dinner. Alexis, I know you're probably tired of family drama, but I wanted to talk to you before Saturday. What specifically did you want to discuss? I've been thinking a lot about how I treated your work over the years, and about how I didn't realize what you were building. She paused, then continued with uncharacteristic vulnerability. I think I was so focused on my own career progression that I never really paid attention to what you were accomplishing. And I think maybe I was threatened by the fact that you were taking risks I wasn't brave enough to take. The admission surprised me. I'd expected defensiveness or attempts to minimize her oversight, not genuine self-reflection. I also need to acknowledge that my colleagues have been asking questions about why I didn't identify your company as a potential partner earlier. It's been professionally embarrassing to admit that I never really understood what my own sister was doing. That's a consequence of choices you made, Natalie. You assumed rather than asking, and you prioritized celebrating your own achievements over understanding anyone else's. I know, and I'm sorry, not just because it made me look incompetent professionally, but because it wasn't fair to you personally. She took a breath before continuing. I also want to be clear about something going forward. I don't expect you to help me professionally just because we're sisters. What you did with the Consolidated Industries crisis was a business decision, and I'm grateful for it. But I understand that any future professional interactions need to be based on business merit, not family obligation. It was exactly the boundary I'd hoped she'd recognize without me having to explain it. I appreciate you understanding that. And Alexis? I know this might sound strange, but I'm actually proud of what you've built. Not just because it's successful, but because you had the courage to create something completely new instead of following a traditional path like I did. For the first time in our adult lives, my sister was acknowledging my work without comparing it to her own achievements or diminishing it with qualifiers. When I arrived at Saturday's dinner, the dynamic was different in ways both subtle and obvious. My parents asked genuine questions about my company's technology and listened to the answers without interrupting to discuss Natalie's latest promotion. Extended family members who had previously made polite small talk about my computer work were now asking sophisticated questions about enterprise software and operational efficiency. But the most significant change was that nobody was performing family pride for an audience. The celebration felt authentic rather than obligatory, focused on understanding what I'd accomplished rather than just acknowledging that I'd accomplished something impressive enough to warrant external recognition. For the first time in 28 years, I was attending a family gathering as myself, rather than as a supporting character in someone else's success story. The boundaries had worked, not because they'd forced my family to change, but because they'd created space for relationships based on mutual respect, rather than hierarchical assumptions about whose achievements mattered most. And for the first time, I believed that the relationships we were rebuilding would be worth maintaining. 6 months later, I was standing in the conference room where this story began, but everything had changed. The Meridian Technologies executive team was presenting their quarterly results to the board of directors, and for the first time in the company's history, their technology partnership success was being highlighted as a primary driver of operational excellence. William Ashford stood at the head of the table, clicking through slides that detailed cost savings, efficiency improvements, and client satisfaction metrics that had all improved dramatically since our partnership implementation. The next-gen solutions integration has exceeded every projected outcome, he announced to the board. Operational efficiency is up 31%, client retention has improved by 18%, and our technology infrastructure is now considered best-in-class by industry standards. I sat in the back of the room, not as a family member or an outside vendor, but as a newly appointed member of Meridian's Strategic Advisory Board. The position had been offered not because of my relationship to Natalie, but because the company's board of directors had recognized that my expertise had become essential to their competitive strategy. Natalie was also in the room, presenting the strategic partnerships portfolio that now included our collaboration as its flagship success story. But she was presenting it differently than she would have a year ago. Instead of claiming credit for identifying and cultivating the relationship, she was honestly acknowledging that the partnership had emerged from circumstances she hadn't anticipated and had required expertise she'd initially failed to recognize. The Next-Gen Solutions Partnership represents a new model for strategic collaboration, she told the board. Rather than traditional vendor relationships, we've developed an integrated approach where technology innovation drives operational transformation. This required us to expand our evaluation criteria beyond conventional partnership frameworks. It was a diplomatic way of acknowledging that she'd missed identifying the most valuable partnership opportunity in the company's recent history and had learned from that oversight. But the real transformation wasn't happening in corporate boardrooms. It was happening in the quiet moments that had redefined what family meant to me. 3 weeks earlier, my parents had driven to Portland to visit my office. Not for a celebration or a crisis, but because they'd asked if they could see where I worked and understand what I'd built. They spent 2 hours touring our facilities, meeting my team, and asking questions about our technology that demonstrated genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. "I don't understand half of what you explained," Dad admitted as we concluded the tour, "but I can see that you've created something important. And I'm sorry it took us so long to take it seriously." Mom had been quieter during the visit, but as they were leaving, she'd hugged me with an intensity that felt different from the perfunctory family embraces I'd grown accustomed to. "Alexis, I need you to know that we're proud of who you've become, not just because your company is successful, but because you had the strength to build something meaningful even when we weren't supporting you the way we should have." For the first time in my adult life, parental pride felt genuine rather than performative. The shift with Natalie had been more complex but ultimately more profound. 2 months after our professional crisis collaboration, she'd asked if we could have coffee to discuss something personal rather than business-related. "I've been in therapy," she'd said without preamble as we sat in a downtown cafe, "trying to understand why I was so blind to what you were accomplishing and why I felt threatened by your success instead of proud of it." The admission had surprised me. Natalie had never been one for introspection or acknowledging psychological complexity in family dynamics. "What have you learned?" That I was so focused on being the successful daughter that I couldn't see success in any form that didn't look like mine. And that I was probably jealous of your courage to create something from nothing instead of climbing existing structures like I did. She'd paused, stirring her coffee with the kind of nervous energy I'd never seen from her before. I also learned that I was using the family's approval as validation for choices I wasn't entirely confident about. When you stopped seeking that approval and found validation elsewhere, it forced me to question whether the approval I was getting was based on actual achievement or just on meeting expectations. The conversation had lasted 3 hours and covered territory we'd never explored before. Not just our professional relationship, but the underlying family dynamics that had shaped both of our approaches to success and recognition. By the end of that conversation, something had shifted between us that went beyond professional respect or family obligation. For the first time, we were talking to each other as adults who were genuinely curious about each other's experiences, rather than siblings competing for limited family resources. But the most important transformation had been internal. The afternoon I'd walked out of that first Meridian presentation, I'd been carrying 28 years of accumulated resentment, disappointment, and frustrated desire for recognition. The validation I'd received had been satisfying, but it hadn't been healing. Healing had come from something different, the realization that I no longer needed their recognition to know my own worth. The birthday they'd canceled had hurt because I'd still been seeking their approval as evidence of my value. The dismissive comments about my work had stung because I'd still been hoping they'd eventually understand what I was building. But somewhere in the process of setting boundaries and demanding respect, I discovered that their understanding wasn't necessary for my fulfillment. Their pride wasn't required for my sense of achievement. Their acknowledgement wasn't essential for my peace. The transformation had been complete when I'd realized I was no longer angry with them for the years of dismissal, not because they'd apologized sufficiently or changed dramatically, but because their opinions no longer determined my emotional well-being. I'd found something better than their approval. I'd found my own validation. Standing in that boardroom, watching Natalie present our partnership as a strategic success, while Ashford credited our technology with transforming their operational capabilities, I felt something I'd never experienced before in a family-adjacent context. Peace. Not the peace of vindication or revenge, but the peace of knowing that I'd built something valuable regardless of who recognized it. The peace of relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperate seeking of approval. The peace of understanding that my worth wasn't determined by their assessment and never had been. After the board meeting, Natalie approached me with an envelope. "What's this?" "An invitation to my birthday party next month. I know it's presumptuous to assume you'd want to celebrate with me after everything that's happened, but I wanted you to know you're welcome." I opened the envelope and found an invitation that was simple, elegant, and genuine, no grand gestures or elaborate celebrations. Just an acknowledgement that she'd like me to be there. "I'd like that," I said. "Really?" "Really. But I should mention, my birthday is the week after yours. Same restaurant, different celebration. You're welcome to come to that one too." For the first time in our adult lives, we were both invited to each other's celebrations. Not as obligations or family requirements, but as people who genuinely wanted to acknowledge each other's milestones. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey from the canceled birthday dinner to this moment of authentic relationship. The recognition I'd received had been professionally satisfying and personally validating. The business success had exceeded every projection I'd made when starting Next-Gen Solutions. But the real achievement wasn't the company I'd built or the recognition I'd received. It was the discovery that I could have meaningful relationships with my family without sacrificing my self-respect. That I could maintain professional boundaries without holding grudges. That I could forgive their past dismissal without forgetting the lessons it had taught me about my own strength. I'd learned that the most powerful position isn't the one where you're seeking approval from people who undervalued you. It's the one where you're secure enough in your own worth that you can choose which relationships deserve your energy and attention. And for the first time in 28 years, I was choosing to invest in family relationships that were finally worthy of who I'd become. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Pacific Northwest Technology Summit, looking out at an audience of 800 entrepreneurs, executives, and innovators who had gathered to hear about, quote, building enterprise solutions in competitive markets. But that wasn't really what I was here to talk about. I was here to talk about what happens when you stop waiting for permission to become who you're meant to be. 3 years ago, I was sitting in a studio apartment, eating ramen noodles and wondering if the technology I was building would ever matter to anyone beyond my development team. Today, NextGen Solutions serves 43 Fortune 500 companies, employs over 200 people, and has generated more than $300 million in operational savings for our clients. The audience responded with polite applause, but I wasn't finished with the setup. But this isn't a success story about technology or business growth. This is a story about what happens when you realize that the people who dismiss your potential have no authority over your future. The applause stopped. The room became absolutely silent. Because everyone in that audience had experienced dismissal, underestimation, or professional rejection at some point in their journey. The title of my presentation today is Building Enterprise Solutions. But what I really want to talk about is building yourself into someone whose value can't be ignored, dismissed, or underestimated by people who never bothered to understand what you were capable of. I clicked to the first slide, which didn't show revenue projections or market analysis. It showed a simple question: whose approval are you still waiting for? Everyone in this room has built something. Whether it's a company, a career, a skill set, or a reputation. But I want you to think about this question honestly. How much of your energy is still focused on proving your worth to people who decided you weren't worth their attention? I let that settle before continuing. Because here's what I learned over the past 4 years of building NextGen Solutions. The most successful people aren't the ones who convince their critics to respect them. They're the ones who become so valuable that respect becomes inevitable. The next slide showed Pacific Manufacturing's operational transformation results. Not just the numbers, but photographs of their facilities before and after implementing our systems. Visual evidence of transformation that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. This client told me that our technology didn't just solve their inventory problems, it revolutionized their entire approach to operational management. But 3 years ago, my own family was calling my work a, quote, computer hobby that would never generate meaningful income. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the audience. Everyone understood the disconnect between external validation and family understanding. The lesson isn't that families are unsupportive, or that critics are always wrong. The lesson is that building something valuable requires you to stop seeking approval from people who aren't qualified to recognize what you're creating. I clicked to the next slide, a photograph from the Meridian Technologies boardroom presentation showing the moment when my professional expertise had finally become undeniable to people who had spent years dismissing it. This is the moment when everything changed. Not because I'd convinced anyone to respect my work, but because I'd built something so effective that dismissing it was no longer an option. The audience was leaning forward now, recognizing the universal experience of waiting for validation that only comes after you no longer need it. But here's the most important part of this story. The recognition felt good, but it wasn't what gave me peace. Peace came from realizing that I'd built something valuable regardless of who acknowledged it. Success came from understanding that my worth wasn't determined by their assessment, and never had been. I shared the story of the canceled birthday dinner, not for sympathy, but to illustrate how personal rejection can become professional motivation when channeled correctly. Every time someone tells you that your idea won't work, your approach is impractical, or your vision is unrealistic, you have a choice. You can spend energy trying to convince them they're wrong, or you can spend that same energy proving they're wrong through results they can't ignore. The next slide showed NextGen's current client portfolio, names that commanded respect in every industry, companies whose partnerships validated our technology more effectively than any argument or explanation ever could. Today, the same family members who dismissed my work are genuinely proud of what I've built. Not because I convinced them to change their minds, but because I built something that changed their reality. The sister who thought my startup was impractical now works for a company that depends on my technology for competitive advantage. I paused to let that irony settle. But the real transformation wasn't external recognition, it was internal peace. I stopped needing their approval because I'd found something better, my own validation. The final slides weren't about business metrics or growth projections. They were about the principles that had guided my journey from dismissed family member to industry leader. First, stop seeking approval from people who aren't qualified to give it. Your critics don't understand your vision because they're not living your vision. Build for the people who need what you're creating, not for the people who question why you're creating it. Second, let your results speak louder than your explanations. Don't argue with people who dismiss your potential. Build something so valuable that arguing becomes unnecessary. Third, remember that the best revenge is success that makes revenge irrelevant. When you're focused on building something meaningful, you don't have energy left for grudges or vindication. Fourth, understand that recognition follows value, not the other way around. Don't build things to get attention. Build things that matter, and attention will follow naturally. I closed with the lesson that had taken me 4 years to fully understand. The people who underestimate you today might become your biggest supporters tomorrow. Not because you convinced them to change, but because you became someone they couldn't afford to ignore. And when that happens, you'll discover that their approval feels good, but their dismissal never really mattered. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but the real validation came in the conversations afterward. Entrepreneurs who had been struggling with family doubt, executives who had been overlooked by colleagues, innovators who had been dismissed by investors, all of them carrying the same fundamental question: how do you maintain confidence when the people closest to you don't understand what you're building? The answer was always the same. You build it anyway. You build it so well that understanding becomes inevitable. You build it with such integrity and effectiveness that dismissal becomes impossible. 3 months after that presentation, I received a letter from a young woman in Seattle who had attended the summit. She was building educational technology for underserved communities, fighting skepticism from family members who thought she should pursue a more traditional career path. "Your presentation changed how I think about validation," she wrote. "I stopped trying to convince my family that my work matters, and started focusing on building solutions that prove it matters." 6 months later, my pilot program is being studied by 3 school districts, and my family is finally asking questions instead of giving advice. That letter sits framed in my office next to the photograph from my science fair victory as a child. 2 images of the same truth. Some people are meant to build things that don't exist yet. And when you're one of those people, the approval you're seeking will always come after you no longer need it. Today, NextGen Solutions continues to grow, not because we're seeking recognition, but because we're solving problems that matter. Natalie and I have dinner monthly, not as sisters competing for family approval, but as professionals who respect each other's different approaches to success. My parents visit our offices regularly, not to understand technology they'll never fully grasp, but to witness the impact of work they've learned to value. But the most important transformation is this: I wake up every morning knowing that my worth isn't determined by who recognizes it, that my success isn't measured by who celebrates it, that my peace doesn't depend on who understands it. Because the most powerful position in life isn't the one where everyone appreciates you. It's the one where you appreciate yourself enough to build something meaningful, regardless of who's watching. And when you reach that position, you'll discover that the recognition you spent years seeking was never as important as the respect you learned to give yourself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.